Back in 2000, a little gem you might have heard of named Medal of Honor was making an impact over the console FPS world, providing some historic background over a key period of history whilst pushing some rather good gameplay. 2 titles in, developers were left wondering where to go next. The idea they came up with was to abandon the exclusive FPS format and try for an arcade flight game that would do for the Air Forces of World War II what the previous titles did for spies and boots on ground. It made for an interesting idea, one that was promptly canned so as the series could remain focused upon its FPS roots. In came LucasArts to the rescue, picked up the pieces and rebuilt them into their own product in a mashup which feels very much like Medal of Honor meets Rogue Squadron. Unfortunately, it didn't draw in quite the fanfare of either, and after a relatively quiet release, was quickly forgotten, and today isn't even available for digital purchase. Question being, why did an arcade flight shooter made by LucasArts go so quietly into the night? Basic answer, the competition outdid it. Ace Combat and Rogue Squadron had become household names in the console market for arcade flight sims, and both are putting out better titles. But let's set the stage. Secret Weapons over Normandy begins in 1940 and follows a U.S. aviator named James Chase, who after joining the RAF's Voluntary International Eagle Squadron is recruited to the ranks of the elite international Battlehawks to roam into trouble areas across the war. Opposing them is the Germans' own elite Nemesis Squadron, led by Krieger. Both sides are on the cutting edge of often prototype technology, both in utilizing as well as fighting it. As such, much of the story is spent dealing with the onset of new tech, notably rockets, jets, and, of course, the atomic bomb. The story has plenty of passing references to history, especially the battles of Dunkirk, Midway, Stalingrad, and Normandy, but it's honestly not all that well fleshed out. The characters remain flat with no unique personalities between them, even if their voices are, and there's little personal drama to the story to pull you into the battle. By this I mean, even though the game attempts to paint the picture of these great building friendships set against the backdrop of war, there's very little personal loss despite the Battlehawks being on the front and center of so many battles. Occasionally someone will get captured, who you'll then promptly rescue in some daring mission, and then eventually, near the end, one of the random voices speaking to you bites it in some inglorious fashion. But outside of that, there's just very little to draw you into the workings of the story. It sets the stage of history, who's good, who's bad, does that functionally well, and that's that. To be fair, the atmosphere is top-notch. Voice acting is all unique, it's easy to tell who's who with little cringeworthy. The music is splendid, though occasionally feels like it was ripped from a scene in Empire Strikes Back, which is a little surprise considering LucasArts, but it does feel a bit whimsical at points. And the graphics were great for their time and hold up pretty decent today. If I were to have a complaint, the aircraft are not as well animated as they could have been. There's not quite the punch from weapon effects you might like, but the visceral effects of blowing apart an enemy in front of you, or anti-air lighting your aircraft on fire, is effective. But where the game really fails to measure up to the competition is the gameplay. There's some neat ideas they had on the table, but the basic flying mechanics too often fail to measure up. It works like this. You begin the game with one plane, the Hurricane, which is functional but has all-around weak stats. As well, you get one secondary weapon, a small bomb, which you drop down on targets for somewhat pathetic damage. As you complete challenges and missions, you gain access to further aircraft and secondary weapons, not to mention upgrades which allow 3 increased levels for armor, speed, and turning, and double ammo counts for your weapon and whatever secondary weapon type you have, that being bombs, cannons, or rockets. But careful, as you only have access to a certain number of upgrade points per game based on how well you complete missions and especially their secondary objectives. There's not enough points to go around. Quickly you'll unlock access to the Spitfire, which is a pure upgrade to the Hurricane, and the weapons and planes come rolling in from there. Enough so that it would be difficult to fly them each in a single playthrough. Most everything you could want to fly is here, from Spitfires to BF-109s to Zeeks to the Wildcat and Mustang to Mosquito and Lightning, and more obscure US prototypes like the infamous Flying Pancake and Black Bullet, the first jet fighters. That said, there are some notable absences. Most obvious, the P-40 never becomes available within the campaign, though it can be seen in the instant action mode. More on this later. While the Thunderbolt and Hellcat are both strangely absent from the game's entirety. What's really off-putting is how each of these aircraft perform. Yes, they have different stats, but the first thing you might notice about the game is how easy it is to turn. Even in the lowest performing aircraft, you'll be pulling turns that would make Afterburner question its airframe integrity. This becomes actually the primary problem with the game. See, aircraft may have their different stats which might contribute to different tactics and how to use them, but the way they all turn on top of the frequency of enemy pilots means everything from bombers to speedy attackers to agile furball warriors essentially can fill the same dogfighting role and do so effectively, limited only by the strength of the machine guns. You turn like you're the gunner on a turret, finding targets and shooting them until they're dead, then finding the next one, and if they're too far away you wait until you're closer, meaning speedier planes are nearly always the best choice, if only so you don't have to wait so long between targets, even if the weapons or armor aren't quite so good or they don't turn as quickly. Turn, shoot, and if you don't pay attention, maybe a stall or two along the way. In other words, there's a little strategy to the game, a little depth because of this. Each of the aircraft perform too similar, and since you can use any of your accumulated weapons with any of them, what's really the difference? I also note that turning here feels strange. Like Rogue Squadron, you're playing banks and turns with a simple motion of the analog stick, simplifying it easily. Here it behaves a bit off, though. Every motion feels exaggerated, and the world quickly becomes off-center when you climb or dive and bank, without any manual way to correct this without leaving the controls alone for a couple seconds. And the process feels awkward. Anyway, effectively, two things separate aircraft: speed and guns. Armor and payload can come to play as well, but for practical worth are negligible. Speed's the obvious one. Most of the game is frantic, trying to get you to the target now, right now, or to your nearby airbase to resupply. But there's often miles and miles and minutes of flying to reach that one place, thing, whatever you missed, which really cuts into the pacing of missions. The speed of aircraft cuts back and makes the game flow far better. On top of this, it affects the stall rate. More power allows you to climb easier, though often stalls out easier at slower speeds. As to guns, well, guns are a bit strange. Each have a standard range which will remain unchanged throughout the game, independent of aircraft. It can change based on comparative speed, but generally it's the same between them. The damage they do, though, is very different. A Devastator will have trouble chewing up even the weakest opponents, while a Mustang will tear them apart with frightening efficiency. It's the secondary weapons, though, which provide for the most unique experience. You have three basic types, and they each perform very differently, with differing ranges of usefulness. For the most part, bigger is better, even if you get less of it, but how you use the weapon can change your playstyle up quite a bit. Take some bombs and you'll find yourself climbing high over a target and making diving attacks for a more accurate drop. With cannons, you can lay waste to anything in gun range with a bare few shots, including other aircraft, but have very limited ammo to deal with. Rockets give you sniper fire, more than doubling your range for an effective ground attack which can make mincemeat of enemy installations. Eventually you even get radio-controlled rockets to fire from even greater range and annihilate your enemies while you wait to close in. But no good game can go without competitive enemy to face off with, and this is perhaps the title's greatest strength. Your opponents here are great, perhaps some of the most balanced I've seen from the genre. Aircraft AI makes for enemies capable of actively avoiding your shots, not to mention decimate you should you become careless. It is aggressive, to the point where the developers made it so colliding aircraft midair does minimal damage, lest the game be an exercise in frustration. It might have been even better, but the exaggerated turning removes a lot of the thought that could have gone into these battles. Meanwhile, the ground is no slouch either, and I enjoy how heavier armor makes a real difference, making certain foes immune to anything but secondary weapons and forcing you to contend with them in different ways. though some opponents, like destroyers, might go down just a bit too easily to things which aren't torpedoes or high explosives dropped onto their decks. Still, enemies and the situations the game puts you in to face them makes the title worth playing. So what else is there to say about Secret Weapons over Normandy? It's a fun game held back most by a single notable flaw. I won't say it's its only flaw though. The HUD is strange, with stall warnings being a bit hard to notice, being just a flashing meter in your throttle indicator, and the stall system in general happens a bit easily without further indication, contrasting none too smoothly with the extreme turning the title promotes. The game also relies heavily on targeting opponents so you can know their range and where to aim to hit, but the target selection is strange, though I did find you can manually target by holding down the button and pointing your crosshairs at your target of choice. I also like how you can lock your camera onto a target, though there's a strange lack of camera controls outside of this, including the inability to change your view present in all competitors. I've heard frequent complaints about difficulty, but honestly felt the game was relatively easy, with a couple standouts here and there which gave a bit of trouble. But the title has a forgiving checkpoint system, no difficulty slider, and I honestly feel competitors offer it up far more punishing challenges. Finally, the game ends on a strange cliffhanger, during the invasion of Normandy as the main antagonist plays the cartoon villain, swearing he'll get you next time. Only for that to be it, as the title earned no sequel. Unfortunate, but it's not like the story was so consuming. Fortunately, you can keep playing with the use of instant action, which allows you to set some basic dogfight conditions and have at it. It's a pretty bare bones team deathmatch, but fun if you really enjoy the flying to the game. Which you might rediscover considering, recall, this is LucasArts. So, you know, X-Wings and TIE Fighters. Anyway, if you're looking for something which plays vaguely like the old Rogue Squadron games and has a little look into World War II, boy have we got a game for you. The title should offer some entertainment for those who enjoy arcade flight sims, but the extremes of the controls might take some getting used to or turn you off. Still, the game does enough right that I'd recommend a look-see to fans of the genre.